In this video, I'm looking at Praggnanandhaa against Giri from round 1 of the candidates. By the way, this is already the third video I've recorded after the finish of round 1. If you want to have a look at Sindarov against Yesepienko and what was the other one? Oh yes, Caruana against Nakamura, which was an absolute cracker. Then do check out my channel. So anyway, back to this one. Pragg against Giri. So neither player coming into this candidates tournament on tremendous form. They both played in the Tata Steel Masters and neither played brilliantly. They were both playing much better earlier in 2025. Giri won the FIDE Grand Swiss in September, convincingly, really sound result. And Pragg won the FIDE circuit and had some really good tournaments in the first half of 2025, but kind of tailed off a bit. So neither player is certain of their form coming into the candidates. This game had a really intriguing opening. I'll be talking more about it right at the end of the video actually, but just to let you know, it was a Grand Prix attack, which is quite a speciality in England, so it really intrigued me. So here we go. Praggnanandhaa against Giri. The 20-year-old Praggnanandhaa against the 31-year-old Anish Giri. Well, hang on, let me go back one move. First of all, we can see c5 from Giri. So he's wants to play a Sicilian. He's been playing the Najdorf a lot recently with black. So that's a sharpening of his approach to the openings, instead of just relying on e4, e5. So that's quite intriguing, but Pragg was ready. He played knight c3, so this is a little bit of a swerve, instead of playing, main lines with knight f3. But Giri has been fond of playing the Najdorf, and this is a kind of anti-Najdorf move actually, because if black makes what for me is the best move, knight c6, then white might go back into an open Sicilian like this and play d4. Now with the knight on c6, you can't play a Najdorf. You can of course close things down with e5. That's a different story. So this is a kind of anti-Najdorf move order. And indeed, Giri plays d6, showing that he's just interested in a Najdorf. So that means if white comes back with knight e2, then yeah, they transpose to a Najdorf like that. But with the pawn on d6, it's quite acceptable to play a Grand Prix attack. And it makes a big difference having the pawn on d6 and not a knight on c6. I'll return to this at the end of the video and explain. But okay, the difference is this basically, that this bishop is able to find a good home by checking on b5. Now if knight c6, this is well known to give white very promising play. This pawn structure is really inflexible. So black has to play bishop d7 and then a4, knight c6, castles, a6. Now here's an intriguing moment. White can take here, and then I think a5 is the best move, but you play this position with d3. Now, this is a strong bishop if the long diagonal gets opened up, but this is playable for white. But instead, Pragg goes bishop c4. Okay, this looks like a surprising move. Why go to b5 and then come back to c4? Well, the point is this, that after e6, and indeed black should be blocking out that bishop, d3, knight e7, you can see that with the bishop on d7, it's not possible to force through d5. With the bishop on c8, you could go for d5. So that's why it was clever for white to just provoke bishop d7, because it blocks the d file. And f5. There we go. So this is the classic Grand Prix attack pawn sacrifice. You know, on any night of the week in England, you'll find someone playing the Grand Prix attack with f5. You know, it's pretty routine and should not be underestimated, I'm telling you. So, what does black do about this? Do you leave it? Do you take it? How do you take it? Well, apparently, Anish Giri has done a Chessable course dealing with this Grand Prix attack, and in this very position actually recommended castling kingside. I mean, this is playable for white. You can take here, maybe swing this knight around to the kingside. It's playable for white and black, basically. Computer says it's about even. But intriguingly, Giri did not follow his own analysis. Instead, he took on f5. Now, queen e1. So that's the standard move in the Grand Prix attack. So the queen looks down the e-file at the king, but also wants to move out to h4. Now, if black were to castle here, then this is the standard attack. You know, this bishop is going to come to one of these squares, either g5 or h6, probably bishop h6, followed by knight g5 with a huge attack. I mean, it really is extremely potent. So black has to compromise here. If pawn takes pawn, that's even worse, because f7 is caving in. So bishop e6 is absolutely necessary to just counter the bishop on c4. Exchange on f5. And again, if a move like knight f5, knight g5 is incredibly strong. So pawn takes pawn, and that enables white to recapture the pawn. But in taking that pawn, you could say that white loses a bit of time. And basically black is okay here. I mean, certainly if the queens are exchanged, then although black has a slightly damaged pawn structure here, that bishop on g7 is really powerful. So black is more than fine. And the king's not bad in the centre. So after queen d7, queen c4. So it means that black's king can't castle on the king side, but goes queen side instead. Now it's a bit drafty there. You know, I'm sure that Giri would rather have a pawn on c7 in this position. Nevertheless, there's a lot of pieces around it, so there's no immediate danger. Bishop g5, good move. Developing and pinning. Steps out of the pin, brings the rook to the open file. I mean, it's clearly a more comfortable position for white than black. You know, white's pieces are very well coordinated, quite active as well. Nice on d5, queen on c4. But you've got to do something with it. And, you know, black could be ready to throw in knight e5. So Pragg plays knight f6, forcing an exchange. And it's certainly nice to get rid of that dark squared bishop. Now Giri plays rook f8. He could have just exchanged rooks and played rook e8. I mean, that simplifies things. But although the computer thinks this is roughly level, I just think with black's pawns as they are, black always has to be careful here, in spite of what the computer says. The computer just says it's equal. But it's still a bit tricky. Rook f8 played, bishop c3, and now f4. Okay, so Giri looking for security, but, you know, that's protected. But it does kind of leave this knight poorly placed, actually. You know, just treading on the toes of the pawn. Pragg exchanged and played rook e1. So he's looking for exchanges now. And again, this is just more comfortable for white, basically. I mean, I think Giri should probably have done that. Instead, he played rook f8, and I find that a very surprising choice, to leave the open file. And queen e6 exploits that straight away. This is a weak square, so, why not go in? And the rook is on an excellent square. Although the king comes out to protect the pawn, the king is also a little bit open as well. And knight g5. Okay, this gets attacked. So the king pushes the rook away. Goes back to e4. That's a provocative move. It's an interesting move, actually. Trying to provoke d5, which just loosens both pawns a little bit. I mean, it's very fine margins, this position. Black is close to equality. But white is definitely more comfortable. And that's an interesting choice from Giri. So he's giving a pawn, but the knight is rather offside now. And then he goes to d5, pushing the rook back, and then d4. So he was concerned about that bishop striking down the diagonal, and it means that this knight is a bit stranded on h7. I mean, it's impossible to win it. At the moment, rook h5 is met by knight f6, obviously, and the rook goes back, then the knight comes out, and white is in that case would be a clear pawn up. But just keeping the knight sidelined makes things a little bit tricky. Knight e5. Okay, rook e4. The rook comes back again. And knight g4. This knight perhaps flying around. And comes into e3. But now c3. And it turns out that, in fact, this knight isn't really doing much on e3. It would be nice to play rook g5, but of course the g5 square is covered by the knight. Knight d5, the knight hops back. I mean, it was possible to exchange on c3, but okay, that's another story, and it feels like white has achieved something there. So Giri played knight d5. I'd just say this is move 33, and Giri was running short of time. He had spent quite a lot of time in the opening, but also the early middle game. And he clearly wasn't comfortable with the position that he got. h4, of course, gives the knight square on g5. And here is where Giri made the fatal mistake. He still has chances to hold this position if he plays b5, looking for counterplay with b4. But he played knight f6, and that was a mistake when short of time. Basically, he miscalculated. Something he overlooked. So the game went like this. Rook e6. So obviously if the knight moves, then the knight on g6 is hanging, so you've got to play rook g5. Rook takes f6, rook g4. So we've had a little exchange there. White is still a pawn up, and h5 is very strong. So the knight gets pushed, and now h6. That's the key move. Passed pawns should be pushed, and yes, knight d3, h7, and it rolls through because the h4 square is covered. So knight f3 played, check. An exchange on e1, rook takes g2, and rook f4. So white is still a pawn up. It's a huge passed pawn on h6. Rook h4 threatened, and then the pawn can be advanced. So rook h2 is more or less forced. Rook f6, and that's a beautiful square for the rook. Guarding the pawn, but also controlling the king, cutting the king off on the 6th rank. A move like king here would be met by rook b6. That is absolutely fatal. Rook h3 played. Oh, one important variation is this. b5, looking for counterplay. Now, you can either play a5 and take this one on the next turn, or you can actually play this. Here's a nice variation. After this, takes h7, so typical of these kind of tricks. If rook takes, then rook a7. Rook a8, lovely trick, threatening to queen, and if a2, then rook a2, and that is game over. So let's just complete it here and a check. So it's hopeless, basically. Rook h3 played, and the king stepped up the board. I mean, there's nothing that black can do here. Giri was going through the motions, and at this point, he resigned. If rook h4 going behind the pawn, then king g5. Rook still can't take because of rook b7 and rook h1, rook h6, and the pawn rolls home. Well, I thought that was a really smooth victory by Pragg. Giri found himself in what was for him quite an unusual and chaotic position, even though, you know, he's done some course on this and has a recommended line. He hasn't played too many Grand Prix attacks. I mean, in Blitz and Rapid, there's one classical game against Jabava in this line. Well, not exactly this position. And it's a slightly chaotic position with a damaged pawn structure, and Giri prefers order. And that's why I think Pragg chose this variation very, very well to kind of wrong foot Giri. Excellent choice of opening. And as for Pragg, well, good opening choice. And even though he didn't have some kind of massive advantage out of the opening, he understood how to provoke Giri really well. And he seized his moment when, very well indeed, excellent calculation, when Giri made an inaccuracy. So great start for Pragg there. And let me see, in the next round, who's he playing? Let me just check. I'll be with you any moment. Pragg has black against Wei Yi. So we'll see what happens there. Other pairings, Yesipenko against Nakamura, Giri Caruana, and Sindarov against Bluebaum. I look forward to round 2.